The storm came out of nowhere. One minute, the sky was clear, a soft breeze swaying the trees, and the next, it was an angry, swirling tempest. Thunder cracked like a whip, and lightning slashed through the sky, illuminating the neighborhood in flashes of white. Jack watched from his living room window, the power flickering once, twice, then finally cutting out. He cursed under his breath. The lights went dead, and the hum of the refrigerator fell silent. The air in the room grew thick with the weight of the outage. It wasn't just any storm. This one was different. And Jack knew that when the storm knocked out the power, it often took hours, sometimes days, to get things back up and running. He stood up and walked to the backyard, where his old backup generator sat beside the shed. It was something he had invested in after his first storm experience, when his refrigerator had spoiled everything inside during a blackout. He wasn't going to make that mistake again. With quick, practiced movements, he wheeled the generator out of its corner and pulled the cord, the engine sputtering to life. A comforting hum filled the yard as the generator roared to life. Jack made sure the extension cord was plugged in properly, then returned to his house, flicking a few switches to ensure his lights, and more importantly, his fridge, were back on. He was set for the night. But as he sat down on his couch, he heard something that made his stomach drop. There was a faint buzzing sound. He paused, listening carefully. It wasn't from his house. It came from next door. Jack stood up and walked over to the window, peering through the blinds. Sure enough, Karen's house, his neighbor's house, was lit up. The soft glow of her living room lights flickered through her windows. Karen's power was back on. He stared at her house for a moment, the light spilling from the windows, contrasting with the ominous storm clouds above. It seemed odd. The blackout had affected the entire block. Karen's house, however, was as bright as ever. Without thinking, Jack grabbed an extension cord and ran it across the yard. The generator's low hum filled the air as he connected it to her house, silently offering a lifeline. After all, they were neighbors. It wasn't much, a temporary fix, but it was the decent thing to do. He'd already powered up his own house. Why not help her out? She'd mentioned in passing how important it was to keep her fridge cold, especially with a house full of kids and expensive groceries. Jack quickly retreated to his own home, shutting the door behind him and turning off the porch light. He was satisfied with his good deed. No one else in the neighborhood had generators, and he had no desire to make a spectacle out of it. Just a quiet, small favor. But the next morning, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The storm had passed, but the unease in his stomach hadn't. And then the message arrived. His phone buzzed with an unexpected notification from the HOA. His heart skipped a beat. A formal complaint has been filed against you for running a generator during the blackout. Please cease operation immediately or face penalties. Jack stared at the message, disbelief flooding his mind. The generator hadn't even been running for that long. It wasn't even loud. And that's when it hit him. Could it be? Could Karen, who had thanked him just hours before, have been the one to file a complaint? The thought felt like a punch in the gut. Jack's fingers hovered over the screen, but before he could reply, the doorbell rang. He walked to the door, his mind racing, and opened it to find Karen standing on the other side. She was wearing a forced smile, and her eyes flickered nervously as she glanced past him at the generator, still humming quietly in the yard. "Hey, Jack," she said, her voice overly casual. "Everything all right with the power? I saw the lights flickering last night and just wanted to make sure. You're okay with all that noise." Jack narrowed his eyes. There was something strange in her tone, an underlying tension. Was she trying to get under his skin? "I'm fine," Jack said, his voice careful. "Just keeping the lights on for a bit. I figured you might need it too." He paused, then added, "You're welcome." Her smile faltered, but only for a second. "Oh, of course," Karen replied quickly, her voice suddenly much too sweet. "I appreciate it. Just, The neighbors. She hesitated, glancing at the generator. Well, they might have a problem with it. Jack stiffened. He felt the weight of the words in the air, as if a trap had been set. The neighbors, he repeated. But before she could answer, Karen's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced down at it, then back at Jack. Her expression flickered, just for a moment. But Jack had caught it. Something was off. Just as he began to piece things together, Karen quickly made an excuse to leave, offering a tight smile and a muttered, "Thanks again." She turned and walked away, leaving Jack standing at the door, his mind spinning with the realization. The game had just begun. The next morning, Jack's phone buzzed incessantly. He hadn't expected to hear from anyone this early, especially after the strange interaction with Karen the night before. But as he pulled himself out of bed and glanced at the screen, his stomach dropped. A message from the HOA. A formal complaint has been filed against you regarding the noise disturbance caused by your generator. Please cease operation immediately. Failure to comply will result in a fine. This is your first warning. Jack blinked, his hand shaking as he reread the message. There was no way this could be happening. The generator wasn't even that loud. He had gone out of his way to make sure it didn't disturb anyone. He wasn't one to rock the boat. He wasn't one to cause trouble. He opened the message again and scrolled through it. It was short, to the point, and dripping with authority. The HOA had always been a pain, nitpicking over the smallest things. Grass lengths, paint colors, and now, a generator that had only been running for a few hours. But this was different. This was personal. The hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood up. His mind raced back to the night before, to Karen's strange behavior, her forced smile, and the way she had glanced at her phone just before walking away. There was something unsettling about the whole exchange. Could she have been the one to file a complaint? Jack tried to push the thought out of his mind. After all, he had been helping her. He had no reason to believe she'd turn on him like that. But something gnawed at him, deep down. Why did she seem so uncomfortable when he mentioned the generator? He paced around his house, the anxiety building in his chest. He had no choice but to comply. He couldn't afford to get into a confrontation with the HOA. Not over something as trivial as a generator. So he turned off the generator and sat in the dimly lit living room, wondering what to do next. But as he sat there, a gnawing sense of unease grew stronger. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to find them. Jack decided to visit Karen. He had to get to the bottom of this, to figure out what was going on. He grabbed his jacket, his mind made up. The drive over felt like it took forever, each passing second stretching longer than the last. When he arrived at Karen's house, it was eerily quiet. The storm had passed, but the neighborhood felt almost too still, like the calm before a storm. Jack rang the doorbell, his hand trembling slightly. He could already hear her footsteps inside, a faint echo of movement. When Karen opened the door, she greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey, Jack. What's up?" Her voice was overly bright, almost too chipper, like she was trying too hard to appear casual. "I got your message this morning," Jack said, his tone calm but firm. "The complaint. About the generator." Karen's smile faltered for just a second, but it was enough for Jack to catch it. He wasn't imagining things. Something was off. "Oh, yeah, about that," Karen stammered, rubbing the back of her neck. "I didn't think it would be a big deal. I mean, the noise really isn't. Well, it's not that bad, right?" She let out a nervous laugh, but Jack wasn't buying it. "I'm just trying to understand why someone would file a complaint about something so minor. It wasn't like I was running it all night. You said it didn't bother you." Her eyes flickered, and for a split second, Jack could see a flash of something. Something she wasn't letting on. Fear, guilt. He couldn't tell. "Well, you know how it is," Karen said quickly, her voice a little too tight. "I think people get annoyed when it's too loud. The neighbors, they're all really sensitive. You know, the HOA. They can be kind of strict about these things. Jack stared at her, his suspicions rising. Her words didn't feel right, didn't match her nervous energy. The neighbors? Who exactly was she referring to? Before Jack could push further, Karen's phone buzzed again. She glanced down at it, and this time, Jack saw it clearly, a message from the HOA. Jack's eyes narrowed. He knew that look. He had seen it before, when someone was hiding something. Karen quickly shoved the phone into her pocket, her hands shaking slightly. "You know," Jack said slowly, his gaze never leaving her face, "this whole thing feels a little fishy. You thank me for helping, and then suddenly I'm being reported. Something doesn't add up." Karen's smile disappeared completely. She took a step back, her voice faltering. "Look, Jack, I didn't mean to make things complicated. I really didn't think it was a big deal." But Jack wasn't listening anymore. The pieces were falling into place, and he could see the truth beginning to surface. Karen wasn't just a victim of some anonymous complaint. She was involved. The question was, how deep did this go? As Karen shut the door in his face, Jack stood there for a moment, the weight of the situation crashing down on him. He needed to get to the bottom of this, and fast. Because if Karen was behind this, it was only the beginning of something much bigger than a simple noise complaint. Jack couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest after his conversation with Karen. Her reaction had been too quick, too defensive. It wasn't just a neighborly concern anymore. Something was off. He could feel the walls closing in, but he couldn't quite pinpoint why. The nagging question in his mind kept replaying over and over. Had Karen filed the complaint? The day dragged on, the quiet after the storm a stark contrast to the brewing storm in Jack's mind. He couldn't focus on anything. Work, chores, not even the TV. All he could think about was the HOA's message and Karen's suspicious behavior. It wasn't until late afternoon that Jack decided to take action. He needed to be certain. Picking up his phone, Jack scrolled through the HOA's email thread again, looking for any clues that might lead him to the truth. But all he found were vague terms, no specifics, no names, just an automated message warning him to stop using the generator. But what really caught his attention was the timestamp on the complaint. It had been filed just hours after he helped Karen. That was it. There was no way it was a coincidence. Jack's mind raced as he connected the dots. Karen had acted like she didn't know anything about the complaint, but the timing was too perfect. She had seen the generator running, she had benefited from it, and just hours later, a complaint had been filed against him. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. Could Karen really be the one to report him? Or had someone else, someone more powerful, pulled the strings? He couldn't trust anyone in this situation. Not yet. He needed to dig deeper. Without wasting any more time, Jack decided to do some recon. His best bet was to speak to the neighbors. They had to know something. The first house he visited was the Reynolds family, who lived 2 doors down. Mrs. Reynolds was a sweet lady, always happy to chat, and Jack had a feeling she'd give him the answers he needed. He knocked on the door, and after a few moments, she appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Jack, how's everything? I heard about the complaint. You're not in trouble, are you?" Jack forced a smile, grateful for her warm greeting. "I'm fine, just trying to figure out what happened. I was hoping you might have heard anything about the complaint." Mrs. Reynolds frowned, her face scrunching in confusion. "Complaint? About what?" "The generator," Jack said, keeping his voice casual. "You know, the one I ran last night. I was just helping out, but apparently someone wasn't too happy about it. Do you know if anyone else got bothered by the noise?" She shook her head. "Well, I heard the generator running, but it wasn't that bad. It wasn't like it was all night or anything." Jack's pulse quickened. "So you didn't hear anything from Karen? She didn't mention anything about filing a complaint?" Mrs. Reynolds' eyebrows shot up. "Karen? Oh no, I haven't heard a peep from her about anything. But now that you mention it, she's been acting kind of funny lately. Always so quick to call the HOA on stuff. But I didn't know she was getting involved in complaints like this. Jack's stomach dropped. You've noticed that too. Definitely, Mrs. Reynolds said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. She's been pretty active with the HOA lately. Not sure what's going on, but it's like she's trying to keep everyone in line. I wouldn't be surprised if she was behind it. She's been making a lot of noise about other people's rules lately, almost as if she's on a mission to get everyone to follow her rules. Jack stood there, processing the information. Karen had been pulling strings behind the scenes, stirring up trouble for the neighbors. It wasn't just a matter of a single complaint. She had an agenda. But what was it? What was she after? Before Jack could ask any more questions, Mrs. Reynolds abruptly excused herself, her attention clearly elsewhere. I'm sorry, Jack, but I've got dinner on the stove. If you need anything, you know where to find me. Jack left her porch, his mind whirling. He had a nagging feeling that this wasn't just about the generator. Karen wasn't just a neighbor complaining about noise. She was a puppet master, manipulating the HOA and possibly even the entire neighborhood for her own gain. Jack's next stop was the local HOA office. He had to confront them directly. If Karen had really filed that complaint, he needed proof. It was time to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. The sun was setting as Jack walked toward the HOA office, its dull yellow glow casting long shadows across the empty streets. He had never had much reason to interact with the HOA before. He paid his dues, followed the rules, and kept to himself. But this was different. Someone had dragged him into a web of lies, and now he was determined to untangle it, no matter the cost. The office was a small brick building tucked away behind rows of overgrown bushes and half-dead trees, the kind of place no one ever bothered to notice unless they had a reason. Jack pushed open the heavy door, a small bell above the entrance jingling softly. The interior was sterile and unwelcoming, the walls adorned with generic art and outdated bulletin boards filled with HOA rules and regulations. Behind a counter sat a middle-aged woman, her glasses perched precariously on the tip of her nose as she clicked away at a keyboard. She looked up as Jack approached, her expression blank. "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. "I'm here about a complaint that was filed against me," Jack said, keeping his voice steady, though his blood was boiling. "A noise complaint. About my generator." Her eyes flickered for just a moment, but she quickly masked it with a practiced smile. "Of course. You're Jack Reynolds, right?" "Yes." She turned her computer screen slightly, tapping a few keys. "I see here that a complaint was filed regarding a generator running during the storm last night. It was filed by a resident named Karen Smith, actually." Jack's stomach twisted. There it was, confirmation. Karen had filed the complaint. But the timing still didn't sit right with him. "Do you have any other details on the complaint?" Jack pressed, leaning forward. "Is there anything else I should know?" The woman hesitated for a brief second, her fingers stilling on the keyboard. She glanced at him over the rim of her glasses. "Well, the complaint was pretty straightforward," she said slowly, as though carefully choosing her words. "But I do have some notes here about Karen. She's been quite active with complaints lately. Seems like she's been pushing for a lot of changes around here, not just for noise, but for other things too." Jack's mind raced. Was it possible Karen was behind more than just this one? Had she been using the HOA as a tool to bend the neighborhood to her will? "Can you tell me more about that?" Jack asked, keeping his tone casual. "What kinds of things has she been pushing for?" The woman hesitated again, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk. "I really shouldn't say too much, but there's been talk. People have been grumbling about Karen's influence. She's made several complaints this year, and most of them, well, they've been about other people's property, what they're doing, how they're maintaining their yards. She's even suggested some pretty extreme measures." Jack's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a generator anymore. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was using her influence to reshape the neighborhood. to impose her own version of what was acceptable. And now Jack was in her sights. "Who else has complained?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice even. The woman glanced around, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "There are others, yes. But the real issue, Jack, is that Karen's been pushing for fines, for stricter enforcement of the HOA rules. She's even threatened to take things to court if people don't comply." Jack's mind was reeling. Karen wasn't just acting out of some personal annoyance. She was building an empire of control, one complaint at a time. And now he was in her crosshairs. "I appreciate the information," Jack said, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "One more thing. Do you have any idea if Karen is connected to anyone else in the neighborhood, or is this all her own doing?" The woman looked at him sympathetically, but shook her head. "I'm afraid I can't say anything beyond what's in the official complaints, Jack. But, well, I think you're right to be suspicious. There's more going on here than just a noise complaint." Jack felt his chest tighten as he left the office. As the door swung shut behind him, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. This wasn't about a single petty complaint. It was about power. Karen was maneuvering behind the scenes, using the HOA as her weapon to impose her will on everyone around her. But Jack wasn't about to let her win. As he walked back to his car, the wheels in his mind were turning faster and faster. He couldn't let her get away with this, not after everything she had done. He needed a plan. He needed to find a way to expose her, to show the neighborhood exactly what she was really up to. But first, he needed more information. Jack knew there was only one place left to go, Karen's house. This time, he wasn't leaving without the answers he needed. The drive back to his house was a blur, the night air pressing against Jack's face as he gripped the steering wheel. Every turn, every street lamp seemed to blur together in a haze. His mind raced with the new information. The HOA's strange reluctance to reveal anything substantial, the hints of Karen's power plays, and her increasing influence over the entire neighborhood. It was clear now that she wasn't just trying to control the rules. She was trying to rewrite the entire community's way of life, bit by bit, complaint by complaint. But the deeper he dug, the more questions surfaced. What was her endgame? Why was she willing to go to such lengths for control? And why, out of all the neighbors, had he become her target? Jack's thoughts consumed him, but he couldn't let himself get lost in them. Not now. It was time to confront Karen directly. He wasn't going to stand idly by while she manipulated the neighborhood. And worse, used him as a pawn in her game. The headlights of his car cut through the darkness as he turned onto Karen Street. He parked a few houses down, out of sight. No need to let her see him coming. He walked toward her house, the quiet stillness of the neighborhood swallowing up his footsteps. As he approached her front porch, he noticed the faint glow of light spilling from the windows. Jack hesitated for just a moment. The tension in the air felt thick, as though the storm from days ago was still hanging over the neighborhood. His heart pounded in his chest, and with every step toward her door, his mind screamed at him to turn around. But he didn't. He couldn't. With a deep breath, Jack rang the doorbell. The sound of the chime echoed through the house. Seconds later, Karen appeared at the door, her face slightly flushed, as if she had been caught off guard. "Jack, what's going on?" she asked, her voice forced, the casualness from earlier completely gone. "I didn't expect to see you tonight." "I need answers, Karen," Jack said, his voice low but firm. He wasn't going to let her control this conversation. "I know you filed the complaint, and I know you've been making a habit of reporting people to the HOA. You've been pulling strings behind the scenes, trying to control this entire neighborhood." Karen's eyes widened, but she quickly recovered, her usual smile returning, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Jack, I don't know what you're talking about," she said, the words coming out a little too smoothly. "I've only been doing what's best for the neighborhood. Keeping people in line, following the rules. What's wrong with that?" Jack's blood ran cold. There it was, the arrogance in her voice, the justification for everything she had done. "No, Karen," Jack replied, stepping closer, his gaze hardening. "You're not keeping people in line. You're using the HOA to get what you want, manipulating people into doing things your way. This is about control. You've been hiding behind these complaints, trying to reshape the entire neighborhood into your own image." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, Jack saw something flicker in her eyes. Anger, fear, something dark and unspoken. She took a step back, as if trying to regain her composure. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The HOA is about following the rules. I'm just trying to make sure everyone does their part." Jack shook his head, refusing to back down. "You're not making sure anyone does their part. You're making sure they do your part. And now, it's time for you to stop." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You really think you can stop me? Do you honestly believe you have the power to change anything?" She laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You're just one person, Jack. Just one. And you're already making a mess of things." Something in her voice sent a chill down his spine. There was no remorse, no guilt in her words, just a quiet certainty that she had the upper hand. But Jack wasn't afraid anymore. He knew what needed to be done. "Maybe I'm just one person," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm not the only one who sees what you're doing. You've been manipulating the HOA, bending the rules to your will. It's time for the truth to come out." Karen's face twisted with frustration. "You don't know what you're messing with, Jack," she hissed. "This is bigger than you think. You're playing a game you'll never win." Jack stepped forward, his eyes locked onto hers. "We'll see about that." Before Karen could respond, Jack turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the night. He wasn't going to let her intimidate him anymore. He had the truth on his side, and that was all he needed. But as he walked back toward his car, a thought struck him. Karen's parting words echoed in his mind. "This is bigger than you think." He didn't know what she meant, but it didn't matter. He was about to find out. The walk back to his car felt longer than it should have. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the quiet hum of the neighborhood broken only by the distant rustle of wind through the trees. Jack's mind was on fire, his thoughts racing as he replayed the conversation with Karen. This is bigger than you think. What had she meant by that? And why did he feel like there was something she wasn't telling him? As he slid into his car and slammed the door shut, Jack's pulse quickened. He couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's threats were more than just empty words. She had power, more power than Jack had realized. And that meant she wasn't going to back down easily. He needed to dig deeper. After hours of tossing and turning, Jack found himself sitting at his desk, staring at his laptop, researching the HOA's past activities. The HOA was supposed to be a neutral body, keeping the peace and enforcing basic rules. But as Jack sifted through records and old community bulletins, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Karen's name kept popping up, again and again. Complaints, fines, petitions to modify the neighborhood's rules. It seemed like she had been at the center of every significant change over the last few years. But there was more to it. Each complaint, each petition, came with a trail of increasingly extreme actions. One of the complaints she had filed had led to a $500 fine for a family, just because their garage door wasn't painted the right shade of white. Another had resulted in the forced removal of a neighbor's garden, which Karen had claimed didn't comply with HOA aesthetics. What was most alarming was the way Karen seemed to target specific families that had resisted the HOA's rules, families that hadn't bowed to her influence. It was becoming clear. Karen wasn't just acting out of some sense of community concern. She was trying to break people down, one fine at a time, until they either conformed or left. Jack slammed the laptop shut, his hands trembling. This wasn't just about a generator. This was part of something much bigger, a twisted power play to control the neighborhood. He had no idea how deep Karen's influence ran, but he had a sinking feeling it wasn't just confined to her personal complaints. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't take this on alone. He needed allies, people who had been hurt by Karen's manipulations. But who? He stood up abruptly, his decision made. The first person who came to mind was Mrs. Reynolds, the neighbor who had given him the first piece of the puzzle. She knew about Karen's manipulations, and Jack had a feeling she wasn't the only one. The Reynolds family had always been vocal about their dissatisfaction with the HOA's rules. It was time to talk to them again. As Jack made his way over to the Reynolds house, his mind raced with questions. Who else had Karen targeted? How many families had been affected by her reign of terror? And why had it taken him this long to see it? Mrs. Reynolds opened the door just as he was about to knock. Her face was somber, her usual cheerfulness replaced with a cautious look. "Jack, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Jack said, his voice low. "I've been looking into the HOA, into Karen's influence, and it's worse than I thought." Mrs. Reynolds stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. She shut the door behind him, glancing nervously around as though making sure no one was watching. "I had a feeling you'd come to this," she said, leading him to the living room. "I told you before, Karen isn't just a busybody. She's been running a campaign, quietly taking control of the HOA, and it's been working. She's got them all under her thumb." Jack sat down on the couch, his mind spinning. "But why? What does she want?" "I don't know," Mrs. Reynolds replied, her voice tight with frustration. "She's made some threats, though. Some people, families who didn't bow to her, have been fined into oblivion. Others have gotten out of the neighborhood entirely, just to avoid the headaches. But it's like she's trying to break everyone, to get them to comply or disappear. And if they don't, she goes for the jugular." Jack's stomach churned. This wasn't just petty complaints anymore. It was a full-blown power grab, and Karen had been carefully orchestrating it for years. "We need to stop her," Jack said, his voice firm. "But we can't do it alone. We need to gather the other families she's targeted. We need to show the HOA what she's been doing." Mrs. Reynolds hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. But be careful. She's not just a small-time bully. She's dangerous, and she's been playing this game for a lot longer than we realized." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he couldn't back down now. If Karen was willing to manipulate the entire HOA, there was no telling what she was capable of. But Jack wasn't going to let her destroy the community he loved. He wasn't going to let her win. He stood up, determination burning in his chest. "We'll take her down, but we do it together." The days following Jack's conversation with Mrs. Reynolds felt like an eternity. Every step Jack took felt heavier, every interaction with his neighbors tinted by the looming threat of Karen's influence. She was everywhere, always watching, always lurking, her hand subtly guiding the HOA's decisions, and in turn, controlling the very lives of everyone around her. But Jack had a plan now. He wasn't going to let her get away with it. He had spent the next few days talking to everyone he could, quietly, discreetly. He spoke to families who had suffered under Karen's manipulations, carefully gauging their reactions. Some were hesitant, fearful of retaliation. Others, like Mrs. Reynolds, were ready to fight back. But no one was willing to go public. Not yet. Then, finally, one afternoon, Jack received a call that could change everything. It was from Mark Henderson, the man who had been fined into bankruptcy for his improperly maintained lawn, a ridiculous charge, especially considering the fact that Mark's lawn was, by every measure, pristine. "Jack, you're not gonna believe this," Mark said, his voice low and urgent. "I've got something that could bring Karen down for good." Jack's pulse quickened. "What is it?" "I've got the email she sent to the HOA board," Mark continued. "The one where she basically ordered them to fine me into submission. It's all in writing. I never had the chance to report it, but I've kept a copy." Jack's mind raced. If this was what it seemed like, They could finally have the smoking gun they needed. "Where is it?" he asked, barely able to contain his excitement. "I'll send it over to you," Mark said. "But you need to move quickly. Karen's already begun pushing for stricter regulations. If she gets her way, it won't just be me she targets. It'll be everyone." Jack's heart raced. This was bigger than just him, bigger than just a few targeted families. If Karen was allowed to keep her grip on the HOA, she would reshape the entire neighborhood to her liking. Jack couldn't let that happen. Within an hour, Jack had the email. He sat at his desk, reading through it carefully. Karen's words were chilling. "Ensure that Henderson family complies or face further fines. If they continue to resist, escalate immediately. This neighborhood is mine to control, and I will not allow anyone to challenge my authority." The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't just a simple case of a neighbor trying to enforce rules. It was a campaign of intimidation, harassment, and outright control. Jack could hardly believe how deeply Karen's reach extended. "This is it," Jack muttered to himself. He printed a copy of the email, along with the records he had gathered from the HOA. It was time to take action. That evening, Jack called an emergency meeting with the families who had agreed to stand with him. He knew that to take down Karen, they needed more than just words. They needed to expose her for the manipulative tyrant she truly was. As Jack entered Mrs. Reynolds' living room that night, the atmosphere was tense. The families were there, all sitting on edge, their faces grim. Mrs. Reynolds, Mark, and a few others who had been affected by Karen's actions were present. "Everyone's ready, Jack," Mrs. Reynolds said, her voice steady. "But are you sure about this? Karen's not going to let us walk away from this. She's dangerous." Jack looked around at the people who had gathered in support. They were scared, no doubt, but they were also determined. He could see it in their eyes. They wanted change. They wanted freedom from Karen's tyranny. "Unsure," Jack said, his voice firm. "We have the evidence. We have the power of the truth on our side. All we have to do now is take it to the HOA board. If we show them what Karen's been doing, they won't have any choice but to listen." Mark looked around the room, his face etched with anger. "She's been messing with our lives for far too long. It's time to show the HOA exactly what she's been hiding." But just as Jack was about to rally the group into action, Mrs. Reynolds' phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, her eyes widening as she read the message. Her face turned pale, and she looked up at Jack with a look of horror. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling, "you need to see this." Mrs. Reynolds handed him the phone. On the screen was a message from Karen, sent just minutes ago. "I know what you're planning. If you continue with this, there will be consequences. You have no idea who you're dealing with." A chill ran down Jack's spine. Karen knew. She knew they were coming for her, and she wasn't backing down. "We don't have much time," Jack said, his voice urgent. "We have to act now, before she can shut us down." The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Everyone knew what they were about to do was risky. Karen would stop at nothing to maintain her control, but the stakes were higher than ever now. If they didn't act, they would lose everything. Their homes, their freedom, their neighborhood. Jack looked around the room, his voice steady despite the rising fear. "This ends now. We expose her for who she really is." The night was thick with tension as Jack stared at the threatening message on Mrs. Reynolds' phone. The words burned into his mind. "I know what you're planning. If you continue with this, there will be consequences. You have no idea who you're dealing with." For a split second, the weight of Karen's warning hung in the air like a storm cloud. It was as though the neighborhood, with all its whispers and secret manipulations, had been leading to this one moment. But Jack couldn't afford to back down now. Not when they were this close. "She's not going to scare us off," Jack said, his voice steady, though he could feel the adrenaline pumping in his veins. He turned to the group, all of whom were visibly shaken, but also resolute. This was it. They had gathered the evidence, and it was time to go public. "We have to do this tonight," Jack continued, his eyes scanning the room. We can't let her control us anymore. We have the truth on our side, and if we don't act now, she'll crush us one by one." Mrs. Reynolds nodded, her face pale but determined. "I agree. We can't let her win." Mark clenched his fists, his voice low and filled with venom. "She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for too long. It's time for her to face the consequences." The group shared a collective breath. Jack could see the fear in their eyes, but beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. They were ready to take the fight to Karen. As the group gathered their things, Jack's phone buzzed again. Another message from Karen. This time, it was brief but chilling. "You'll regret this. You have no idea who's really behind me." A cold shiver ran down Jack's spine, but he pushed the fear aside. Who was behind her? Karen's influence was bad enough on its own, but if there was someone pulling strings behind the scenes, someone even more dangerous, that would change everything. But Jack couldn't afford to worry about that now. The meeting with the HOA board was in less than an hour. He had to focus. They made their way to the HOA office, the darkness of the night pressing down on them like a weight. The building loomed ahead. Bright lights flickered from the windows, casting long shadows across the parking lot. It was a sterile, oppressive place, its cold exterior a stark contrast to the warmth of the neighborhood they were fighting for. As they entered the building, Jack felt his heart pounding in his chest. He led the group to the conference room, where the HOA board was already seated. Karen was there too, her usual smug expression firmly in place. She didn't seem surprised to see them. She had known this was coming. Jack set the printed emails on the table, slamming them down with a decisive thud. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice echoing in the silent room. The board members exchanged wary glances, but Karen didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto Jack with a predatory gleam. "You think this changes anything?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think a few emails are going to bring me down? You're playing a dangerous game." Jack didn't back down. He pointed to the papers in front of them. "You've been using the HOA to manipulate this entire neighborhood. You've been hiding behind complaints, using threats and fines to bend everyone to your will. We have the evidence, and we're not backing down." Karen's eyes narrowed. She took a step forward, her face inches from Jack's. "You don't know what you're up against," she hissed. "I've been planning this for years. You think this is the end? You have no idea what I'm capable of." But Jack was done being intimidated. He met her gaze, his voice steady. "I don't need to know everything you're capable of. I just know this. The truth is out, and there's no going back for you." Karen's face twisted in fury, but the board members were silent. It was clear she had lost control. Her power was crumbling. The truth was louder than her threats. Just as Jack thought victory was within reach, the door to the conference room suddenly burst open. A tall man in a suit stepped in, his presence commanding attention. He was unfamiliar to Jack, but the way Karen's face paled made his blood run cold. "Karen," the man said, his voice like steel. "It's time to go." Jack froze. The man wasn't just some associate. He was someone important. The way he spoke to Karen, as if she were a subordinate, sent chills through the room. Karen, for all her bravado, didn't argue. She nodded, quickly gathering her things and shooting Jack a final venomous glare. The man turned to Jack, his cold eyes scanning him. "You've made a big mistake, Jack," he said, his voice low and warning. "This is far from over." Before Jack could respond, the man and Karen turned and walked out, disappearing into the night. The room was silent for a long moment before the HOA president cleared his throat. "I think we've seen enough," he said, his voice unsteady. This is unacceptable. Karen's actions will be investigated immediately." Jack felt a strange sense of relief wash over him, but it was fleeting. The man's words echoed in his mind. This is far from over. The battle had been won, but the war, that was just beginning.